Welcome to the Gump Report. This one I had to do because of what happened on Monday when Roman Reigns won the championship and the Usos came right back to him and not Solo appeared, but Jacob Fatu appeared because he wants what you got. Roman Reigns' title, the money, the fame, the way to pay for his family. Essentially, let's make this very clear. The bloodline is back again. We had almost four to 4.5 years of the bloodline storyline on WWE TV. It went from the old era into the TKO era and now into the Silver Lake era, which no one really talks about. I will be leaving a link below showing the acquisition of Endeavor by Silver Lake, because everyone still says it's TKO. TKO doesn't exist anymore. TKO has been acquired by Silver Lake. So it's Silver Lake, Endeavor, TKO, UFC, WWE. And I will be leaving that link below of their acquisition of the company. And Ari, generally speaking, is the CEO, but not the owner of Endeavor. Now, the reason I'm making this is because of how bad. And I know people are going to say, in WrestleMania 42, the first night was bad, but the second night saved it. You got to understand, the second night was really good. The matches were great. What happened at the end was great. That's it. It might not have been a great WrestleMania, but it was saved by night 2. Wrong. You are wrong. This is not meant to say you're stupid, but you do not understand the full scope of what you just got. Understand, I've stated this for 2 years, that no one understands when the vice chairman position of Vince McMahon at the time, now The Rock has it, we didn't know who was going to replace him. We were not happy that he was still going to be doing some level of influence on WWE. Ari wanted him just to be the vice chairman, but it was obvious that Vince still wanted some influence in WWE when the grand allegations came out was just the thing that Ari needed to get rid of Vince, because he knew that Vince was still interjecting himself into the day-and-day operations, and he was told, Vince, you need to run TKO with me or for me. But Vince was still doing split, doing TKO as the vice chairman and still trying to influence over in creative WWE. He got ousted and he's been out ever since. But let's make this very clear what you truly got. I stated this for the last 2 years. You do not have WWE anymore. WWE does not exist. Not as a wrestling promotion the way it used to be. It is not. Everyone thought that Triple H was going to save everything. I said no, because you don't know when whoever's in charge, like Ari, guess what? Ari interjected himself eventually. It took over a year to nearly 2 years, but he eventually injected himself with Pat McAfee. And you actually believe it's over. You actually believe what you got in WrestleMania was good. It was not. Make it very clear. The corporatization, if that's a word, is so heavy with WWE, the defunct WWE, that every time you see a pay-per-view or anytime you see a show, there's so much interjection of ads, of the wrestlers themselves having to sell things more than they normally would, is nauseating. And then, just taking away from that, because if you saw WrestleMania 1 and 2, night 1 and night 2, you saw so much advertisement, which seeing that a Tiffany Stratton and literally a Drew McIntyre selling an app that is for gambling that probably kids will go for is 100% disgusting. But this is not the worst of it. Now, understand, I want to make this clear. WWE is not the only one that does it. AEW done DraftKings for years. We know that's an app that's for gambling. We know it. Many corporations do it. But this is the thing that no one understands. You take away all the advertisement. The interjection of storyline is all that you're going to want to understand. Or in this case, the lack thereof of story. Because you now have Roman Reigns, who had a near 4.5 year reign of 1,160 or 70 days. I could be wrong about the amount of time. I know it's over 1,000. I think it's 1,100. The only person I've ever known that had a run long as that was Nick Aldis in NWA. He had a run that was over 1,040 days. The longest I'd seen from a promotion. Yes, NWA is now considered like indie, even though it's one of the most legacy promotions next to CMLL. Remember, CMLL is the first. And when it comes to NWA, it's the first promotion that brought other promotions together as regional. It came out in 49. All the other promotions work with it. It is the first one you could say that was the prelude to WWE. Because remember, when WWE was finally taken by Vince Jr., and he went head to head with all the other promotions, he basically took what he thought could be the best from all those promotions, not just their wrestlers, but some ideas. You know, he had to take some ideas from them. And he made what it is. NWA was the prelude to that, but it's just all the promotions worked under one umbrella. In this case, only one promotion survived that has everything under its umbrella. But in this situation now, where you see that WWE, and I'm going to keep calling it WWE because I don't want to get you totally confused, because the best way to call this is Silver Lake WWE. But if you're not used to understanding that Silver Lake owns Endeavor, you have to get used to it. That's why I'm not going to just call it that right now. That's the reason why I left a connection below to Silver Lake's own site and the acquisition of Endeavor. I want you guys to start learning about this. But here's the thing. You have Roman Reigns, who is now champ again. You see Jay and Jimmy coming back to him and wanting to start doing the bloodline all over again. Now you have Jacob Fatu not at the wayside, but pretty much saying, I want a match. And now they're going to start doing a story with that. The bloodline working with one of his own to legitimately give you story. And that is the reason why this is what you do not understand. And I know you don't. But I'm going to explain it. When you look at pro wrestling, you look at pro wrestling, not just the person that's at the top. Because if you look at the golden age of pro wrestling, back in the 80s, late 90s, you could say barely into the early 2000s. But when you have the early days of the golden age of pro wrestling, it was hot, amazingly hot. But it wasn't just that Hulk Hogan was the top of it, or Andre the Giant. You had multiple different people that had multiple different storylines that had been given, the word I always say, relevance. Look at the 1980s. You look at Brutus the Barber Beefcake. You look at Macho Man Randy Savage. You look at Hulk Hogan. You look at Roddy Piper. You look at the Rockers. You look at so many different types of wrestlers that were flamboyant, that did the job in the ring, that to a certain extent, like a Bob Backlund, who really did work, but he always had other people around him that he could work with that were more charismatic than him, that were more hateful than him, that when he had to work, they could be someone to pick up the slack of when he wasn't great as a talker or great as a character. Of course, Bob Backlund got better years later when he tried to become the president of the world. Well, the United States, but of the world, I call it. There was always different characters who had different storylines that you can latch on to. Look what happened with the Rockers, with Marty Jannetty and a early Heartbreak Kid, who was Shawn Michaels, that broke away from him and literally shattered everyone's perception that the Rockers would be forever. That was a storyline that no one expected to happen. Look what happened when Hulk Hogan had his feud with Macho Man Randy Savage, or Hulk Hogan with not only The Ultimate Warrior, but also Andre the Giant. There were different storylines going on that had relevance. It wasn't just, you had the biggest storyline here, you also had small ones. You had, when you had Steamboat go up against Macho Man Randy Savage. You had, look what happened with the British Bulldog. Look what happened with Bret Hart. That was another storyline. It may have not been here, but it was here. And then they were here. And then they were here. And then you have some here. Here. You had multiple levels of storyline with multiple levels of wrestlers who had multiple levels of character. Incredible characters. Good characters. Great characters. Yeah. Mediocre characters. Look at the Brooklyn Brawler. He is one of the most versatile wrestlers that ever had been in the business. He was the Brooklyn Brawler. He was the Boston Brawler. He was Kimchi. He was Doink. He did multiple work at multiple levels, and he was remembered for that. That is what makes wrestling the way it really is. It's not just incredible work in the ring. It's layers of work that these wrestlers are supposed to do. And now, with the proper, well, let me put it like this. You see, and I will use it in this situation, Silver Lake owning WWE now from last year around May, taking it over from TKO that purchased it, well, merged with it actually, purchased it and then merged it and created TKO. Wait, sorry. There's a lot of things here. Silver Lake took over Endeavor, which Endeavor purchased WWE, and they created a company called TKO Group Holdings. At this point, the product of WWE that is owned by Silver Lake does not care about creating wrestling. As I keep saying this over and over again, this company does not care about making wrestling. It cares about making money using wrestling. There is a difference. I will say it here again. When you look at a company, any company that is pro wrestling, their purpose is, yes, to make money. But they're there to make the best product possible that you will like it. Trying to give something either to a niche audience like ECW did with hardcore wrestlers, with a lot of crazy stuff, but didn't diverge a little bit to be casual. TNA, which tried to take the original WCW crowd, ECW crowd, and older members of the WWF, WWE crowd, trying to take them, that type of group and niche. At this point right now, WWE is not doing that. And when you see that years ago, they produce content, and this is promotions, no matter which one, that was focused on giving the best in-ring action, out-ring segments, craziest stuff, or the most emotional, either hate, fear, love, confusion, something to give you emotion that they could. WWE is not doing that anymore. The only thing they're doing is using what has already been built many, many years ago and rehashing it over and over and over and over again. And this is where you're going to have a problem with Roman Reigns. Now, many people, and I'm sure someone's going to say, dude, come on. Uber Femi is now on the main roster. Ethan Page is now on the main roster. Devon Evans is on the main roster. So Ruka is on the main roster. Yeah, they are. They're on Raw and SmackDown. But you need to understand. How do you think they're going to book them? Understand. In wrestling, and you can say a lot about Vince. Vince understood one thing when he was in that mindset of understanding wrestling. People you bring up, you build them correctly. And when they're ready, when you think they're ready, you start putting them into storylines that will go somewhere. And hopefully while they're doing that, the people will fall in love with them or just outright to hate them as you want them. You want people to be hated in wrestling. You want people to be loved. Stone Cold Steve Austin was one of the rare ones that was in between, that could float between them both. He could be bad, he can be good. But at this point, WWE doesn't care about building people up as long as it makes them money. It's not about making money and making the product better. It's about making money. And they will stick with the same thing over and over again. And even though they'll see someone that looks like they're really popular and they'll start pushing them, you're going to notice that they're just going to stay at a certain level, or you're going to notice that they'll be pushed to the top, but you won't see anything substantial from them, especially when it comes to the stories, because the only thing they're going to want to do is make sure these people are over enough that their merch sales will be the only defining factor. It will not be, well, these people are really good, we need them here. They can make the product even better, more fun, but does it sell merch? Does it sell the buys online, particularly through Peacock, through Netflix? That's all they care about. You're going to say, well, they used to do that years ago. Yes, they did. But they understood they need to balance it. Ergo, you can say a lot about Vince, and I am not praising Vince. I want to make this clear to anyone who's watching this. Vince is a piece of shit. He was a piece of shit back then. He's a piece of shit now. But I want you to understand, you can see the difference between the piece of shit, the guy he is, and the way he functioned as a owner of the company. He made sure advertisements needed to be tempered with in-ring action, out-ring segments, and anything that will not interfere with the product itself. Because if you interfere too much with the product by interjecting too much ads, too much merch, too much trying to squeeze every dollar out of everybody, it'll go from here to here. He understood that. That's the reason why advertisement never used to be in the ring. That's the reason why he was always careful to only have advertisements when it was necessary. That's the one thing I could say he was smart on. But as he got older, going into the mid-2000s, having WWE studios, then getting the XFL, then he was diverging so much into different things, he didn't care anymore. The only thing he cared about was trying to be a corporate businessman instead of a promoter who was a businessman. A promoter still thinks, I got to make sure my in-ring product works, even if I got to be involved in it, which he was a character at one point. And then another point. And then another point where he got something stuck up his ass by Stone Cold Steve Austin while he was in the hospital. That is what we have here. We do not have a promoter who understands that you need to balance stories, wrestlers, in-ring segments, outside segments, promos, and temper that with some level of advertisement, merch sales, meetups, whatever. There is no more balance. It used to always float with WWE. Sometimes they go really well and do this. Sometimes they do this. But they always floated back and forth because it counted on the situation. Now, this is it. And that is the reason why Roman Reigns is who he is now. Roman Reigns has been champ for 4.5 years, if I remember correctly. 4 to 4.5 years. They now put him back onto the same thing again. And they're going to rehash the same thing again. Whether it's a year, a few months, or multiple years, this is what they want. They're going to use the one thing that worked the best. And that was Roman in the bloodline. And everyone had to go through him. But here's the thing. That no one's going to understand. They're going to be saying, okay, everything's back. The bloodline wasn't really bad. It was great. But what else did you have? If you remember, during the time after the pandemic, it was the bloodline and it was Judgment Day. You had two very strong, very well-built groups that everything filtered under them. But the problem was that nothing else was built. So you had Judgment Day here. You had the bloodline here. Everything on their perspectives were built under it to a certain extent. Once the merger happened, once Triple H had it, he maintained it to a certain extent. But once Judgment Day was gone, you had only the bloodline, and everything was not very well structured under it. No matter what show you were on, you had some influence from the bloodline. But now, when the bloodline was ended, there was nothing to replace it. So when the bloodline, here's Judgment Day, it was gone. Then everything was working with this, it was gone. Everything's a mess. Look, where my hand is floating around, that is what they have now. And yes, they revigorating now the bloodline again and trying to rebuild it here. But here's the problem. You're back to the same situation you were when you had Justice before you broke up the bloodline. And you don't have this. Or another one in the middle. You only have one. And many people would say, well, dude, that is how it's always been. No. You have to understand. It's not about this and filtering everything down. It's about making sure you have this. And as I said, at the golden age of wrestling, this. And then you have all of this under it. So whenever you need to get rid of this, something could be slotted up. Someone could be slotted up. A story from someone else. Remember what I said about Macho Man Randy Savage and Steamboat. It could have been, back then, Ultimate Warrior with Hogan. And he wasn't the most popular wrestler anymore. It was Macho Man. But whenever it was necessary, you could slot him up. You literally do not have that anymore. You may reconstruct the bloodline and try to filter everything below it, but guess what happens? You're going to have the same situation when you have Bloodline and Judgment Day. Two here that were important and everything non-constructed. No incredibly well-built male or female characters. No very well-constructed, well-built, and well-organized storylines. Not great segments in the ring. Only action in the ring. And we went through that before. And in the end, that's what we got. And on top of it, where they don't have very well structured wrestlers, storylines, segments, you now have what I called, they don't care about making wrestling. They want to use wrestling to make money. Advertisement. This is the product where it should be. Or at least here. This is where it is. And more you're going to notice more advertisements. More segments where you can have celebrities keep being interjected. Look at what happened in WrestleMania. We had dozens, at least 24 celebrities from football, baseball, from television shows. From what I learned from JD, we had a billionaire sitting next to Cole I couldn't believe Barrett News Barrett was sitting next to a guy who runs a scrapyard business that's nearly several million to near $1 billion. He's not worth anything. He had no mic on. He was just sitting there because he wanted to sit there because he paid this. That is the major issue you now have in this pro wrestling Debunked, who is now a satellite company. I want to make this clear. WWE is a satellite company. That's what it is. A large corporation like Silver Lake now has Endeavor. It now has TKO. Well, Endeavor, TKO, UFC, WWE. This is a satellite company. This is a satellite company. This is a satellite company. And this is a satellite company. All satellite companies under the control of a conglomerate known as Silver Lake. And they don't care about wrestling. They don't care about sports. They don't care about music. They don't care about movies. They only care about making money. And if they believe, like UFC, they can tell them to stop doing wrestling and mixed martial arts and wrestling, boxing, using jiu-jitsu. They can tell them stop just doing straight boxing. They can turn Ultimate Fighting Champion that has been built around mixed martial arts into just boxing. They can tell Dana White, make it boxing now. And if he says no, you're gone, fired. And they'll find someone that will restructure UFC into boxing only instead of mixed martial arts. When it comes to WWE, I've said it multiple times that WWE being owned the way it is, they don't need to keep doing wrestling. WWE can be restructured into doing bowling. You think I'm joking? I'm not. They can restructure a pro wrestling company to do bowling. If it's more profitable, if it makes more money, they will tell Ari, who is the CEO, make WWE do bowling now. Forget about pro wrestling. Have every wrestler become a bowler now. Do storylines around bowling. He'll have to do it. If he doesn't, he's fired. It makes no difference what you think they will do. If they want, they will do it. And I've heard Tuesday Night Titans. They don't see it. It's only a matter of time before they will learn that WWE doesn't exist anymore. Yes, you got people who do wrestling in there, but at any time when the Silver Lake shareholders or Ari Emanuel himself interjects themselves, everything will go out of whack and it will make the fans hate it. And guess what? They're not going to care. Because as long as the merch keeps selling, as long as the buys for PLEs still go and meetups are still going, they don't care. Does it mean it'll never get better? It can. If someone buys it from Silver Lake, which, well, the purchase has to go through Silver Lake and got to be considered, then Ari will make the final decision if it means something, if Silver Lake doesn't have a problem selling it. But would it go to someone who would understand? I don't know. That is a long way off, and I want to make it clear that it's a long way off. And if you think Vince is going to buy it, he won't. At this point, remember, Vince McMahon is running his own investment firm right now. He founded an investment firm. He's working in investment now. He's not doing wrestling. And if anybody thinks that Vince would be a better person to own WWE again, you're wrong. Because at the age of near 80, he's still the same Vince that we had before the merger. Remember, what has Vince done differently when he was in charge? Before the merger and after? Nothing. It is not going to be Vince. Could it be The Rock? He would have to do a lot of investment. The most he has is near $1 billion of money. He does not have the money, well, 800 or 900 million. So he probably has investments that lead up to about maybe 800 million. But then he has liquid assets, maybe about 100 out of that 800 million, 900 million. So in the end, I don't know if The Rock can do it by himself. He'll have to get multiple different type of companies to help him to buy it from Silver Lake. And maybe he would buy it. Could someone from Saudi Arabia buy it? Of course. But guess what? It will go under Middle Eastern standards. They may get rid of all the women. You say they won't, they could. They can give an order that all women be removed from pro wrestling in WWE. Well, going on Impact and TNA, so far he's had maybe about 34, 35 matches under his belt. He's shown some good signs of being a good wrestler. And you can say it about, not about Logan Paul, but he is a very good wrestler. He does a good character. He's done well at that. But if they keep interjecting people, like at the stadiums, at the shows, and make it more about them, making stories about them, dealing with wrestlers, then you're going to see it's just going to keep going down and down and down, and it's still going to have to charge you this. But this is just me, and I hope you enjoyed this Gump Report. Give me a comment below. I will be making this, and I'll be putting up exactly, once I finish, I'll be editing it, and I'll be uploading it immediately. Peace.